You finish school, you get a job, you get a better job, you take a course on the side, you optimize your mornings, you read about people who wake up at 5 and you feel vaguely guilty for waking up at 7. And somewhere in the middle of all that, you forget to ask a pretty basic question. Is this actually working for me? Not for your resume, not for your career, for you. I'm not asking that from a place of having figured it out. I genuinely haven't. I still check my phone before I'm fully awake. I still feel weird doing nothing on a Sunday afternoon, like I should be doing something, learning something, producing something. But I've been thinking about this a lot lately, about where that feeling comes from, and whether it was ever really mine to begin with. At some point, being exhausted stopped being a problem and became a personality trait. You know how it goes on a Monday morning. Someone says, I'm dead. The other person says, same. I got like 4 hours last night. And then there's this weird little competition where both of you are trying to outsuffer each other. Who slept less? Who has more on their plate? Who is one bad email away from completely losing it? And whoever wins that conversation loses in every other sense. But it feels like winning, which is strange when you actually stop and look at it. Two people, jobs, roofs over their heads, competing to see who is more destroyed by their own life. And nobody stops it because it's not seen as a problem. It's seen as proof that you're serious, that you're in the game. And then there's the hustle content, the podcasts, the YouTube channels, the guys posting their morning routines. Woke up at 4:45, cold shower, journaled, meditated, gym, 3 calls before 9, currently on my 4th coffee, feeling unstoppable. And people watch that and feel inspired. Or worse, they feel behind, like they're not doing enough because they only woke up at 7, like a normal human being. And the worst part is that it works on you, even when you know it's absurd. You watch a 10-minute video of some guy explaining his 5 a.m. routine, and you close it feeling vaguely guilty about your own morning. Even if your morning was fine, even if you got things done, the comparison machine doesn't care about that. It just tells you someone somewhere is doing more and you should probably feel bad about that. Productivity became identity. You're not someone who works. You are your output. And if your output slows down, if you take a week off and actually disconnect, something feels wrong. Like you only exist when you're producing something. Like rest is a transaction, something you earn after enough suffering, not something you're allowed to just have. Think about how people talk about vacations. I really needed that. As if rest is medicine you take when you're sick enough to justify it. Not a normal part of being alive. You don't hear people say, I really needed that about eating lunch, but rest somehow became this thing you have to deserve. Here's the question I keep sitting with though. When did rest start feeling like failure? Because it wasn't always like this, and I don't think it has to stay like this either. But to understand how we got here, I want to talk about a guy who took the whole thing in the completely opposite direction. And I mean completely. There was a Greek philosopher named Diógenes who lived in a barrel, not a metaphorical barrel, an actual large ceramic barrel on the street in Athens. He owned basically nothing. He begged for food, he slept outside, and he was one of the most famous people in the ancient world, which when you think about it is its own kind of joke. The guy with nothing was more famous than most people with everything. The story that gets me is the one with Alexander the Great. Alexander at this point is probably the most powerful man alive. He's conquered half the known world. He has armies, gold, an empire that stretches further than most people could imagine. And he hears about this weird philosopher living in a barrel, and he gets curious, so he goes to find him. He walks up to Diogenes, who is just lying there in the sun doing nothing, and Alexander says, I am Alexander the Great. Ask me for anything you want, and I'll give it to you. And Diogenes looks up at him and says, yeah, could you move? You're blocking my sun. That's it. That's the whole interaction. The most powerful man in the world shows up and offers you anything, and you ask him to get out of the way so you can keep lying in the sun. Now, I'm not saying Diogenes had it all figured out. The man lived in a barrel. That's not a life I'm romanticizing or recommending. But there's something in that story that's worth sitting with for a second. Alexander had everything the world said you were supposed to want. Power, wealth, fame, legacy, and Diogenes had none of it. And somehow, Diogenes was the one who didn't need anything from Alexander, not the other way around. The people around Diogenes thought he was crazy. They thought living like that was embarrassing, undignified, a waste of a life. And he basically said, you're the ones running around exhausting yourselves for things that don't matter. I'm the one lying in the sun. Who's crazy? The point he was making wasn't that ambition is bad or that you should stop caring about things. It was something more specific than that. He was against working yourself into the ground to impress people you don't even like, to afford things you don't actually need, to reach a status that keeps moving the moment you get close to it. That very specific hamster wheel. He had zero patience for it. And I think about that sometimes when I'm doing something not because I want to, but because I feel like I should be seen doing it. You know that feeling? When you're not working because you're inspired or because the thing actually matters to you, you're working because stopping would feel like falling behind. because being still for too long feels suspicious, even to yourself. That's the thing Diogenes was poking at, and he poked at it by completely opting out, which most of us won't do. But the poke still lands. Here's where it stops being abstract. At some point, the body sends a bill. It always does. It just doesn't tell you when. And when it arrives, it doesn't come as one big thing. It comes as a collection of small things that you keep explaining away. The headaches that are probably just stress. The sleep that stopped being restful somewhere around 2 years ago. The tension in your shoulders that you've stopped noticing because it's just always there now. The thing where you're on vacation and you're supposed to be relaxed, but your brain won't actually turn off, and you spend the whole time thinking about what's waiting for you when you get back. People find out at 38, at 42, at 45. High blood pressure that came out of nowhere. Anxiety that used to be manageable and now isn't. Insomnia that started as a bad week and turned into a bad year. Stomach problems that the doctor links, diplomatically, to stress. And the doctor says you need to slow down. And the person sitting on that table thinks, slow down how? I have a mortgage. I have kids in school. I have a performance review in 6 weeks. I have a team that depends on me. Slowing down isn't a lifestyle choice. It's a luxury that other people have. So what happens? You manage it. Pill to sleep, coffee to wake up, something for the anxiety to get through the afternoon, something for the stomach because the coffee wrecked it. 4 different things to keep one body functional at a pace it was never designed for. And you go back to work, and you call it fine. And everyone around you calls it fine too, because they're doing the same thing. I'm not saying this from a distance, by the way. I've had versions of this. The Sunday night dread that starts around 4 in the afternoon and gets heavier as it gets darker outside. The inability to actually rest on a vacation because my brain treats it like a problem to be solved rather than a thing to be experienced. The feeling that even when nothing is wrong, something is wrong, because I haven't produced anything today and that feels like a problem even when it objectively isn't. It's a weird thing to admit out loud, but I think a lot of people know exactly what I'm talking about. That background hum of not quite enough, not quite keeping up, not quite where you should be. And the uncomfortable part is that the hum doesn't stop when you do more. You do more and the bar moves. You clear your inbox and there's a new inbox. You finish the project and there's a new project. The finish line is a horizon. It moves with you. And if that's you, the question worth asking isn't how do I get better at managing this? It's how did I end up here in the first place? And more importantly, did I actually choose this? There was a Roman guy named Seneca who wrote one of the most direct things I've ever read about time. The essay is called On the Shortness of Life, and the basic argument is this: life isn't actually short. We just waste most of it. Not on the things we usually feel guilty about, not on rest or leisure, or doing nothing on a Sunday. We waste it on busyness that we never chose, on other people's urgency, on being available, responsive, productive, present for everything except the things that actually matter to us personally. He wrote, and I'm paraphrasing here, that people guard their money and their possessions with extraordinary care, but throw their time away without a second thought. You'd be furious if someone stole $20 from you. You'd remember it, but you'll hand over entire years of your life to work you didn't choose, to a pace you didn't set, to a system that benefits from your compliance, and you won't even think to ask for them back. The time spent is gone. There's no refund on years. And yet somehow, money feels more real, more worth protecting than the hours that actually make up your life. Now here's the part of Seneca's story that I find genuinely funny. This man who wrote so beautifully about simplicity, about wasted time, about living with intention and not squandering your years on things that don't matter, was also one of the most powerful and wealthy political figures in Rome. He was the personal advisor to Emperor Nero. He owned multiple houses. He was rich in a way that most people in his time couldn't imagine. He was completely thoroughly embedded in the system he was critiquing, and he knew it. He actually wrote about it. He acknowledged openly that the gap between his philosophy and his actual life was real, that he was writing about how to live and not fully living that way, that he was a work in progress, same as everyone else. I find that weirdly comforting, not because it lets him off the hook, but because it sounds honest. He wasn't presenting himself as someone who had transcended everything and was now dispensing wisdom from a mountaintop. He was a guy who understood something clearly and still couldn't fully live up to it. Which is, if we're being honest, basically all of us. You can know something is true and still find it hard to act on. That's not hypocrisy. That's just being human. The thing Seneca kept circling back to, across multiple essays, was this: most people never actually decide how to spend their time. They just respond to whoever is loudest, to whatever feels most urgent, to the notification, the deadline, the expectation, the thing that will cause a problem if ignored. And at the end of a week or a year or an entire career, they look back and can't really account for where it went, not because they were lazy, because they were busy, constantly, productively, exhaustingly busy, just never quite at the thing they actually cared about. Does any of that sound familiar? Because it sounds very familiar to me. There's a story from a Chinese philosopher named Zhuangzi that I think about more than I probably should. There's a cook who is butchering an ox, and he's so good at it, so fluid, so precise, that the prince watching him thinks it looks like a performance. The blade moves through the animal without force, finding the natural spaces between joints and bones, following the grain of the thing instead of fighting against it. No hacking, no strain, no brute force, just this smooth, almost effortless movement that looks nothing like work and everything like something else. The prince asks him how he does it, and the cook says he stopped seeing the whole ox a long time ago. He works with his mind now, not just his hands. He's found the way the thing naturally comes apart, and he follows it. He doesn't impose his will on it. He finds where it wants to go, and he goes with it. Now, Zhuangzi wasn't writing a guide to butchery. The point was about a way of moving through the world. Not forcing, not grinding, not powering through resistance, with sheer willpower, and 4 alarms, and a motivational quote on your phone lock screen, but finding the grain of things and following it. Doing work that moves the way the cook's blade moves, with intention and without unnecessary friction. Hustle culture is the opposite of this. Hustle culture is the whole ox, all at once, with a blunt instrument. It's the idea that the amount of force you apply is proof of how serious you are. That if something isn't hard, you're not trying hard enough. That struggle is the metric of effort, and effort is the metric of worth. And I'm not saying don't work hard. Some things are genuinely hard and require real effort, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there's a difference between difficulty that's inherent to the work and difficulty that you're generating by forcing something that doesn't fit. Between resistance that means you're doing something challenging and resistance that means you're doing something wrong. Have you ever had a stretch of time where you were so absorbed in what you were doing that you forgot to check your phone? Where you looked up and 2 hours had passed and it felt like 20 minutes? Where it didn't feel like work, even though by every external measure it was work? That's closer to what Zhuangzi was pointing at. That state where the thing you're doing and the way you're built to do things are actually aligned. And the uncomfortable question, the one I don't have a clean answer to, is how often that actually happens in your week, versus how often you're just pushing through something because it's on the list, and the list has to get done, and done is better than not done, even if the doing feels like dragging yourself through something that was never really yours to begin with. Look, I'm not gonna wrap this up cleanly because I don't think it wraps up cleanly. I'm not telling you to quit your job. I'm not telling you to stop being ambitious or to stop caring about what you do. I'm definitely not telling you to go live in a barrel. Though honestly, Diógenes seemed pretty relaxed about the whole thing, so maybe don't rule it out entirely. What I keep coming back to is something simpler than any of that. Most people who are living at a pace that's quietly wearing them down never made a conscious decision to live that way. It just accumulated. School taught you that performance was the point and rest was what you did when you'd earned it. Work reinforced that. The content around you every single day tells you that the people who are winning are the ones who never stop. And somewhere in there, without a specific moment you can point to, it became the default, the water you swim in, and you stopped noticing it was water because it was everywhere. The thing about defaults is that you don't question them, you just execute them. You wake up, you feel behind, you push, you crash, you recover just enough to push again, and you call that discipline. You call that ambition. You call that being serious about your life, and maybe it is. But maybe it's also just a pattern you inherited and never examined. Seneca would probably say you're spending your life responding to other people's urgency and calling it purpose. Diógenes would probably say you're exhausting yourself for things you don't actually need to impress people, you don't actually care about. Zhuangzi would probably say you've been hacking at the ox with a blunt blade when you could be finding where it naturally comes apart. I'm not sure any of them had the complete answer. Diógenes lived in a barrel, Seneca worked for Nero, and it didn't end well for him. Zhuangzi wrote philosophical riddles about cooks and butterflies. They were all doing their best with what they had, same as us, but they all stopped at some point and asked the question. Not the big existential one about what it all means. The smaller, more uncomfortable one, is this pace mine? Did I choose it? Or did I just inherit it and start running before I had a chance to ask where I was going? That question doesn't have a clean answer. It might not have any answer, but I think it's worth asking before another year goes by at a speed you didn't sign up for. Because the thing nobody tells you is that the pace doesn't slow down on its own. Nobody is going to tap you on the shoulder and say, okay, you've done enough, you can rest now. That moment doesn't come from outside. If it comes at all, it comes from you. And maybe that's where it starts. Not with a big decision, not with quitting anything or changing everything, just with a pause long enough to ask the question, is this mine? And actually waiting for the answer.